Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to be doing another presidential election prediction between former President Donald Trump and incumbent President Joe Biden. It is now the beginning of November, which means 2023 election night is coming up, which also means that 2024 election night is just about a year away now. Before I start, I'd like to say if you like my content, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you know when we upload, and also leave a like and comment. And with that said, let's get into it. So we're going to start how we always do and fill out the solid states for each candidate, starting with Donald Trump. Those states are going to be Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, North and South Dakota, Nebraska at large and its 3rd congressional district, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, Iowa, and South Carolina. As for the solid states for Joe Biden, those are going to be Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, New Mexico, Colorado, Illinois, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine at large, Maine's 1st congressional district, and Washington, D.C. Now I'm going to fill in the likely states for each candidate, again starting with Donald Trump, and the first state here is going to be Alaska. Now, Alaska is a state that has been shifting towards Democrats for some time now. Ever since 2008, it's gotten better and better for Democrats. And in 2022, Mary Peltola, the Democrat, won the special election for this seat and then won the general election in November. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that aren't necessarily going to carry over into the presidential election, but there's no denying that Alaska has been trending toward Democrats. Donald Trump only won it by 10 points last time, so I do think it's going to drop below that 10-point threshold. I do think Trump's going to still win it by a decent margin, though, so I'm calling it likely Republican. Next up is going to be the state of Ohio. Now, Ohio is a state that Barack Obama won twice in 2008 and 2012, and then Donald Trump flipped in 2016. And Trump didn't just flip it by a narrow margin. He flipped it by 8 points, and then in 2020, he won it by 8 points again. And the reason Trump is doing so well in Ohio is because, just like in the rest of the Midwest, the rurals are trending very rapidly towards Republicans, and Ohio is having these suburban trends towards Democrats as well, but they aren't as strong or potent as they are in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And so Donald Trump is still able to put up strong margins in Ohio, but that is preventing him from winning Ohio by more than 10 points. So I am calling Ohio likely Republican. Next up is going to be the state of Florida. Obviously, Florida has been trending towards Republicans for some time now. In 2016, Donald Trump flipped it from Obama, who had won it twice. And then in 2020, it actually shifted towards Trump when most of the country and most states shifted against him. And on top of this, voter registration numbers have looked really good for Republicans in the state of Florida recently. Back in 2020, when Trump won the state, Democrats actually had a voter registration edge in Florida, and now Republicans have a voter registration edge in Florida by like hundreds of thousands of votes. So it's pretty clear that Florida is becoming a pretty solid Republican state. I do think it's going to be short of the 10-point margin, but I do think Trump will probably win it by 6 or 7 in 2024. So I am calling Florida likely Republican. Next is going to meet Nebraska's 1st congressional district. In the process of redistricting in 2022, Nebraska's 2nd congressional district got a little bit redder, which means Nebraska's 1st congressional district got a little bit bluer. And Donald Trump won that 1st congressional district in 2020 by about 15 points. So mixed with the trends there and around that area and the redistricting, I do think that this will fall slightly below 10 points. So I am calling Nebraska's 1st likely Republican. Next up is going to be Maine's 2nd congressional district. This is another one that voted for Obama twice and then voted for Trump by a big margin in 2016 and then held by a pretty big margin in 2020. Depending on the trends in the rest of New England, I do think you could see this district get a little bit closer, but I do still think Donald Trump will win it by more than 5 points, so I am calling it likely Republican. So now I'm going to fill out the likely states for Joe Biden, and there's only going to be one, and it's going to be the state of Minnesota. Now, Minnesota is historically a very blue state. Right now, it has the longest streak of voting for Democrats because it's the only state that did not vote for Ronald Reagan in 1984. And despite this, Donald Trump did get very close to winning it against Hillary Clinton in 2016. He only lost it by about 1.5 points, and that led a lot of people to think that it was going to be close in 2020 as well. But instead, Joe Biden won the state by over 7 points. And when you go back and look at 2016's results, the only reason Donald Trump was able to get even close to Hillary Clinton's numbers in that state is because of high third-party turnout. Hillary Clinton only won with 46% of the vote to Donald Trump's 45% of the vote, which means almost 10% of the vote in Minnesota in 2016 was third-party, which evidently helped Donald Trump a lot in the state. Now, in 2024, there is potentially going to be an important third party candidate, but that third party candidate will actually probably hurt Donald Trump in the Rust Belt. I haven't mentioned him so far because there haven't been really any states that he applied to yet, but RFK Jr. is now running an independent campaign after trying to primary Joe Biden earlier this year. And most polling actually shows that RFK, despite being a Democrat, is going to take more from Donald Trump than from Joe Biden. In the polling averages right now, Donald Trump is leading the popular vote polls by around a point. But when you factor in RFK, Joe Biden is leading by around 2 points. So if anything, this time around, the third party vote could make Minnesota even more blue. At the end of the day, I don't think that Joe Biden is going to win it by double digits, but I do think he's going to put up a strong performance in Minnesota, so I am calling it likely Democrat. Finally, I'm going to fill in Nebraska's 2nd congressional district as likely Democrat. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but the reason this area is getting so much bluer is because of suburban trends that are happening all around the country that are very favorable to Democrats. In 2016, Donald Trump won Nebraska's 2nd congressional district by about 2 points. And then in 2020, Joe Biden won it by over 6 points. And in redistricting, it did get redder again because it took from some of Nebraska's 1st congressional district. But the suburban trends are not going to stop. They might slow down a little bit, but they're definitely not going to stop. So I do think that Nebraska's 2nd will probably be around the same margin as it was in 2020. So I am calling it likely Democrat. So now that I've filled out all of the solid and likely states, we have Donald Trump at 179 electoral votes and Joe Biden at 226. So now I'm going to cover the remaining toss-up states, starting with the state of Nevada. So Nevada is a state that has been trending towards Republicans for quite some time now. Since 2008, it has shifted right in every presidential election. So a lot of people think that this might be the year that Nevada finally flips towards Republicans. In fact, a lot of Republicans think that Nevada could possibly be their best chance at a flip, which I disagree with. It is true that Nevada has been trending towards Republicans, but Republicans still continue to underperform expectations in Nevada. In 2016, Donald Trump was supposed to win that state if he was going to win the election at all, but then he ended up winning several other states and did not end up winning Nevada. In 2022, Republicans did flip the governor seat, but the Senate seat was also supposed to flip, and then the Democrat ended up narrowly winning anyway. Ultimately, I do think Trump will do better in Nevada than he did in 2020, but I do still think Joe Biden will win it by a couple points, so I'm calling Nevada lean Democrat. Next up is going to be the state of Arizona. Arizona is a state that has kind of been like the opposite of Nevada. It's been trending towards Democrats for a while now, and in 2020, it finally flipped away from Republicans and voted for Joe Biden very narrowly. But it's clear that the trends are not stopping in Arizona because in 2022, Katie Hobbs won the governor election when Kari Lake was widely expected to win, and the Senate race was considered a toss-up, but nobody expected it to go blue by 5 points, and then ultimately it did end up going by that margin, which kind of shocked a lot of people. And the reason Republicans are getting killed in Arizona recently is because of the suburban trends that are happening all around the country, especially affecting Arizona. In 2020, Joe Biden was the first Democrat to win Maricopa County on the presidential level since Harry Truman, and Maricopa County is the home of Phoenix and all of its suburbs. With these trends taken into account, I do think Joe Biden's going to win Arizona again. I think he's going to win it by a bigger margin than he did in 2020, probably by between 3 and 4 points, so I am calling Arizona lean Democrat. Next up is going to be the state of Texas, which is another state where suburban trends are really boosting Democrats here. Texas has been trending towards Democrats for a while now. Used to be ruby red in the Bush days. Then John McCain won it by, I think, a little bit less than 10 points in 2008. Then Romney won it by, I think, close to 16 points in 2012. And then Trump won it by less than 10 points again in 2016 when he won the election. And then in 2020, he only won it by a little less than 6 points. And in the 2000s and early 2010s, a lot of people thought the reason Texas was going to flip eventually was because of Hispanic trends and how Hispanics voted heavily towards Democrats. But recently, Hispanic voters have been trending towards Republicans and are actually part of the reason why Donald Trump and other Republicans are still able to win Texas. In 2020, despite the suburban trends, Donald Trump crushed it in the Rio Grande Valley. Some counties down here shifted towards him by like 40 or 50 points. Fortunately for Democrats, this is not enough to cancel out the suburban trends, which is why Texas trended towards Joe Biden in 2020. I do think that trend is going to continue, but I do think Donald Trump is going to hold on to the state narrowly, so I am calling Texas lean Republican. Next, we're going to move on up to the Rust Belt state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a state that unexpectedly flipped to Trump narrowly in 2016, and then in 2020, Joe Biden flipped it back by an even narrower margin than Trump won it by in 2016. For a while, a lot of people, especially people on the right, thought that Wisconsin was trending towards Republicans and that the 2020 result was just a fluke. But then in 2022, Republicans totally underperformed all expectations in Wisconsin. In the governor race, Tony Evers won re-election by a couple points when he was supposed to lose or at least have it be a close race, but Tony Evers won by a couple points. And in the Senate race, Ron Johnson only won by 1 point when he was leading the polling by several points. Also, I kind of touched on this earlier, but I think the Rust Belt is where RFK's presence in the election would have the most effect. The reason for this is because I think a lot of RFK's support probably comes from rural areas that used to be Democratic or ancestrally Democratic, but don't really like the modern Democratic Party and voted for Trump in 2016 and 2020. And the reason RFK has this appeal here is because he does have mostly normal Democratic views, but things like his stances on vaccines kind of appeal to rural areas, especially in the Rust Belt. Ultimately, with all these factors at play, I do think Joe Biden is probably going to win Wisconsin by a couple points, so I am calling Wisconsin lean Democrat. Next up is going to be the state of Michigan. Michigan's another state that Trump unexpectedly flipped in 2016 by a very, very narrow margin. I believe it was the closest state in the 2016 election. And then in 2020, Joe Biden flipped it back by a little over 2 points. Michigan is kind of a similar story to Wisconsin, except bluer. The suburban areas are having a bigger effect on the swings in the state, and it's a lot more unionized, and unions tend to vote a lot more for Democrats. So I do think that Joe Biden is going to win Michigan again. I think probably by 4 or 5 points, so I am calling Michigan lean Democrat. Next, we're going to move down to the state of Georgia. And Georgia is a state that has very favorable demographic changes for Democrats. Aside from the suburban effects that are happening in Georgia, just like they are across the rest of the country, there's a growing population of black voters in Atlanta, which are going to vote heavily Democrat in future elections. And that is already affecting Georgia's elections, as in the midterms, Raphael Warnock won a second term, a first full term. And in 2020, Joe Biden flipped the state by surprise by a very narrow margin. Now, with that said, the state of Georgia is still winnable for Republicans. In 2022, we saw all the statewide offices go towards the Republicans except for the Senate seat. And even then, the Senate election went to a runoff, and that was against a really bad candidate in Herschel Walker. So it is clear that Republicans can still win here, but a lot of that also was because of low turnout, and specifically low black voter turnout. I think when you take into account presidential level turnout and demographic trends in the state, I do think Joe Biden's going to win the state again. He's probably going to do better than he did in 2020 by a couple points, so I am calling Georgia lean Democrat. Next up is going to be the state of North Carolina. Now, unlike what a lot of conservatives think, I actually think that Joe Biden has a pretty decent chance at flipping North Carolina. Donald Trump won North Carolina by over 3 points in 2016 and then by less than 2 points in 2020. In 2022, Ted Budd won the Senate election by about 3 points, which was less than people were expecting. So Republicans have actually been underperforming in North Carolina. They also lost a congressional seat or two that they were supposed to win. And the reason for this is suburban trends like everywhere else, but also a growing tech industry in the state, which is turning the state bluer. So I don't think Joe Biden's going to win the state. I do think Donald Trump is going to carry it narrowly, but I am calling it tilt Republican. Finally, we have the state of Pennsylvania. Now, this is another state that Donald Trump won in 2016 unexpectedly, very narrowly, and then Joe Biden narrowly flipped back in 2020. Things in Pennsylvania generally do look good for Democrats right now, other than the voter registration trends, which are getting better for Republicans, but most of that is ancestral Democrats who don't vote for Democrats anymore anyway, switching their voter registrations to Republicans, so it's not really affecting the state that much. Not only that, but Democrats have been winning the statewide offices in Pennsylvania. Last year, they won the governor election by 15 points almost, and the Senate election by 5 points. And overall, the Pennsylvania Republican Party is just kind of in shambles. Now, it is true that Donald Trump does have kind of a special appeal here. I mean, he's one of the only Republicans who's been able to win the state in recent years. But Joe Biden just happens to be that perfect counter for Donald Trump, especially in Pennsylvania, since Joe Biden kind of grew up around the area. He was born in Scranton, and then he grew up in Delaware, but close to the Pennsylvania border. Ultimately, I do think Joe Biden wins Pennsylvania by a couple points, so I am calling Pennsylvania lean Democrat. So with all these states filled out, I have Joe Biden winning re-election with 303 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 235. Is this kind of a boring map? Maybe. it's exactly all the same states that each candidate won in 2020. But it is what I think is going to happen right now, and I would never lie to you guys. Even though Donald Trump is currently leading the polls, I don't think that's going to hold, especially as the campaigning kind of ramps up and Democrats start putting more into it. I also expect that when Trump's indictments start getting more serious and he starts going to court and people start seeing that, I think he's going to probably lose some support. And like I mentioned earlier in the video, I do think that RFK is broadly going to hurt Trump and take votes from him that otherwise would have gone to him. And it's still early, so we don't even know if RFK is going to stay in the race or if his numbers are going to continue to be as high as they are right now. But if they do stay in the low teens to high single digits, that could spell disaster for Donald Trump. But at the end of the day, we are still about a year out from this election, so take this with a grain of salt. I'm sure it will become a lot clearer what's actually going to happen around next summer. But with all that said, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you like my content, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you know when we upload. And also leave a like and comment and let me know what you agree with and what you disagree with. Thank you guys so much for watching and have a great day.